We're going to study God's Word together here. We have been looking at Romans from 12 to the end of the book is pretty much a lot of practical stuff. Believing the gospel message of justification by faith has a practical effect in our lives. It works its way out into how we live. Not just what we believe with our hearts and believe with our minds, but how we actually live in the world. And today, it gets really practical. Because the buzzword on all the commercials, all the things you see is we're in this together. Why does stuff always get to my throat right when it's time for me to speak? Anyway, I got some water right here. We're all in this together, right? That's what it says. We're in this together. And so today we got to look at some text that's probably some of the most frustrating things to deal with in practical issues. The things that God commands us to do, we have to do. Today kind of is not fun to deal with because we're talking about the government. And we're talking about the government in an election year. We're stressed just because it's an election year, all of us. Doesn't really matter what your stripe is or what your flavor is, politically speaking, ideologically speaking. We are in a place where now our country is perhaps divided more over ideology than ever before. At least that's what it feels like to me. It seems like there's hardly ever a middle ground for anything. Not that necessarily middle ground is the best thing, but we are all extreme. Everybody's on an extreme view of everything. And we're living in an age where misinformation and propaganda are the norm. Not just regular journalistic news, even if we don't like the news. It's propaganda more than it is news. And then you throw politics in the middle of all that, just the actual political battles that are going on. It makes me just want to skip over the text. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. But you know what? I can't do that, right? I'm an expository preacher, and we have to deal with the text as it goes. So I'm going to try to do that. I've always been sort of a war movie junkie my whole life, so anything about wars, especially wars that the United States has been involved in, I want to study it. And not that I'm an expert or a genius on any of it, but I am an enthusiast. And so this documentary came out a couple of years ago with Ken Burns called The Vietnam War. Excuse me. And on there he had a decorated Marine hero named John Musgrave. He interviewed him several times and clipped him in there. And John Musgrave said this, because he was a Marine Corps, and he was 18 in 1964. He wanted to join the Marines because they're the best. That's what he said. But he said, we were probably the last generation that actually believed our government would never lie to us. That's what this Marine said that's what he thought in 1964 as an 18-year-old, before he went to Vietnam. And then when he said that, it clicked into my heart, my head, wow, I don't really believe much of anything the government says to us anymore. He was the last generation that believed they would never lie to you, and I'm believing most of the things they say to me are lies. What's up with that? That's only one generation later. I was 2 years old. Bizarre, isn't it? And it makes you just go, man, we got to deal with politics. We got to deal with the government. But I am an expository preacher, and I'm going to stick to the text. And while I am enthusiastic about politics, and I'm very conservative in my political views, I really honestly, whenever I'm up here preaching the gospel, all I want to do is stick to the text. I want to minimize and avoid politics from the pulpit. Not because I don't have anything good to say. It's just, if it's not in the text, I want to stay away from it. And hopefully, all I will say about politics today and for the next 7 verses is this. All of you listening need to know what you believe, what you believe about all the issues as best you can. Try to nail it down as best you can. Then you prioritize those beliefs and rank what's the most important down to the least important. And then you vote for the candidate that's as closest to those values as you have. Politics. Here's an issue. you believe of something about the issue, and you say that the issue is number one priority, I'm going to vote for the guy who has that the most. That kind of a thing. Now, if you don't know what those things are, there's a website called isidewith.com. Just like I said, at isidewith.com, you can take this quiz on there, a questionnaire, and it'll pretty much put you in a place where you know what you believe, because it asks a lot of hard questions on all the issues. I like it. So that's all I'm going to say about politics today. Know what you believe, prioritize those beliefs, and then vote for the candidate that's closest to those beliefs. That's my politics. So anyway, let's look at the text here. Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. I'm going to read verses 1 through 7, but I'm only going to preach verse 1. Y'all knew that already, right? Anyway, let's read it all. Excuse me. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, he who rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and he will commend you. For he is God's servant to do you good. But if you do wrong, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant, an agent of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also because of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give everyone what you owe him. If you owe him taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Now those 7 verses have way too much to deal with for me today, and I don't even know where to start. My head is pounding because it's an election year, because government drives me nuts. So much stuff to deal with. R.C. Sproul writes this. He has a little book about government. He says, government is a structure that is endowed legally with the right to use force to compel its citizens to do certain things and not do other things. That's a good definition of government. They have the right to legally use force to make you do something or not do something. And some mornings I'll wake up and I'll flip on MeTV and it's got the Leave It to Beaver on there. Wally Cleaver, Beaver's older brother, he said, the city's got to maintain law and order. You can't do that without kicking people around. That's the same thing R.C. Sproul said Wally Cleaver. You can't do that without kicking people around. You got to maintain law and order. Now here, just to start to preach this stuff, because of the political mess that's going on and all of the issues that are out there, and everybody's in a sort of weird tizzy all the time, step back for a second and think about it. We in the United States have been blessed more than most people in the world in all of history. Just living in the time you're living in the country you're living in now, you are blessed more than most of all the people ever in the history of the world in any place they've ever lived. You have more stuff, you have more freedom, you can do anything you want to, even in a quarantine. You can drive around on the street. It's madness. Our government is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Abraham Lincoln said that in the Gettysburg Address. By the people, of the people, by the people, for the people. So it might not really stress us out too much, should it? We've got it made. I should be preaching, man, this is great. Submit to the government. Yay! But this text, Romans 13, verses 1 through 7, has stressed a lot of Christians out over the centuries and over the different places where they have lived. Even if we're not that stressed, we think we are, but we're not really, because we got it made. We truly do. even with our government. Even the government who would not lie to us. We got it made. Let's look at the text, verse 1, Romans chapter 13. Everyone must submit himself to the governing authorities. It starts off like this, everyone. I like this. Literally, it says every soul. It's the Greek word psyche. We get psych and psychology from it, those kinds of words. Every soul. And it's a Hebraism that Paul uses from time to time and other writers use. It just means everybody. Every soul means everybody. Every single person on the earth. Everybody must submit to the governing authorities. And it surely includes, and in this case, Paul's case, certainly means Christians. Because that's who his audience is. He's writing to Christians. Hey, you Christians, you submit to the governing authorities. He gives us a command. It's an imperative verb in the Greek. It's a command. You have to do this. And it's also in a passive voice and in a present tense. Be continually submitting to the government. Be continually submitting to the government. Let everyone be continually submitting. Here's this term he uses, submit. It's a military term. It means to line up under, to place or rank under, to subordinate to, submit to others or directives of somebody else. It means to be under the authority of some authority. You're under the authority of an authority. That's the word. To follow the direction of those in authority over you. That's the meaning of the word. A military term that says when your boss says to do something, you do it. If any authority over you commands you, you do it. That's submit. Now, this is not necessarily meaning the same thing as the term or the word obedience, although it surely includes obedience. And obedience is certainly meant here. It means more than that. Obedience can be done just with an outward performance. Your boss says clean up that warehouse, you go clean up the warehouse the whole time you're grumbling and hate your boss. Your mom says go clean your room, you hate cleaning your room, but you do it anyway. This is a word that has more of a hard attitude attached to it. A hard attitude toward those who are over you. A hard attitude toward those who are in authority over you. And it's important. It's important because sometimes you're just not really able to obey like you should. But even if you can't obey, you should have a hard attitude of obedience and submission. The attitude of your heart is the most important part. Here's why. For you to submit to those in authority over you, even if you're having a difficult time with them, means this, that you have believed that God has authority over your life, and He is the one who has placed you in this position where you are underneath someone's authority. And you're trusting Him. That's why it's a hard attitude thing. It's not a matter of just rigid obedience, it's a matter of hard attitude obedience. God has given me this. God has placed this in my life. So submission doesn't just become an obedience to a command, it becomes faith. Submission means you're living by faith. You're living that God, you're trusting God that He has you in the place where you're supposed to be, in the United States of America, or wherever it is. You're trusting God with your life. Because you have to do that. You have to. Think about it. If you were an 18-year-old Marine and you went to Vietnam in 1964 and all the stuff you saw, even though you got a lot of medals and you were a hero, that guy was a hero. He came back from the war going, I just don't believe my government anymore. They let me down. They lied to me. I can't trust them. There's always some kind of mess they're throwing on me. Now my generation believes that about everything. What if they let you down? What if the government is not actually acting in the parameters of the U.S. Constitution? You go, I got to trust God for that. I got to believe God's in control here. What if they send me to war based on a false narrative? You just got to trust God, right? It's a hard attitude of trusting God. That's why you submit. And we let ourselves be submitting to the governing authority. uses two words here. The first word is governing. It means to hold over or to have above, to be superior in rank, to be better than, to surpass, to have control, to restrain. That's what the word governing is. To surpass you, to have control over you, to restrain you, to be superior to you. Those who are the higher-ups over you have superior authority than you do. That's the one word. The other word is the word authority, which is ruler. The authority to govern. Those who are superior, who have authority to govern. Those who have authority to have authority. They're not the same words, but that's the meaning. Paul basically means here what? The government. Paul means the government. And I think pretty much most of your translations say it that way. Governing authorities, something to have to do with the government. And by that he means all of them, the kings, the governors, the magistrates, all in authority. Everyone who has authority over you in a government level, that's who you submit to. That's who you are to let yourself be submitting to. Now for us, in the United States of America, we have the president, we have the Congress, we have all the governors, we have the mayors, we have the state governments. And I would say, from our perspective in the United States, as those powers exist according to the Constitution. Let's go ahead and say that, because we're Americans. And if you're not an American listening to this, hey, wherever you are. We have a Constitution that tells us whose our authorities are. Much of the world has been ruled by tyrants and dictators and corrupt politicians. Even in free societies, the rulers have not governed wisely. Even in places where you're really free to do what you want and say what you want. Even those in authority over you then have done and said and meant dumb things. They haven't governed those and had genuine concern for their citizens, have they? That's the frustrating part. And so we're to be submitting to those who have the power to kick us around. We have the command here to be submitting to those who have the authority to control us and to compel us to do something right or wrong by use of force. Not right or wrong, one thing or another thing. Do one thing or not do another thing. I said that wrong. To compel you to do something or not do something by force. We have to submit to that. Charles Hodge writes, obedience is not enjoined on the ground of a personal merit of those in authority. Doesn't matter what kind of person they are, doesn't matter how sweet they are, or how good they are, or how wise they are, but on the ground of their official station, just because they're there. Period. Just because who they are, that's it. Because he's the president, you submit. Because he's the governor, you submit. Because it's the Congress, you submit to the laws they make and the president signs. That's it. That's it. That's all it is. That's what the text means. The governing authorities have authority over you, and you submit to whatever they say. Now, some Christians, at this point, you start getting in all kind of conflicts with our own souls and Christian ideas that other Christians have had. Some have argued that the kingdoms of this world are not in control. And some have argued that the kingdoms of this world are not our kingdoms, and so our subjection to those kingdoms are not valid. Believe it or not, there are Christians who believe that. And so some of you advocated things like fighting and revolution and all kinds of rebellious things and grandstanding and protests and everything you can do as Christians to get the government to do it your way. So they can be freed to serve God's kingdom only. And a stranger, my citizenship is in heaven. Problem is, just because you are not of this world, it doesn't mean that you're exempt from submitting to the government. Being Christ's follower and a citizen of his kingdom does not negate or replace your responsibility to the secular governing authorities. I think when people use verses like that to say you don't have to submit to the government, they are distorting what those verses actually say, for one. And certainly it's remarkable to me that this was not Jesus' view. Now, he's our Lord, right? What does he say? What does Jesus say? Well, they came up and asked him, is it right to pay taxes? He said, give me a coin. Whose inscription? It's Caesar's. Well, then he says, Matthew 22, 21, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Caesar owns something, you got to give it to him, right? The only kind of pennies you have what? The only kind of pennies you have Abraham Lincoln's face on them. That means the U.S. government. You have to give those pennies to the government. They don't belong to somebody else. They belong to the government. You get to use them. Jesus also said in John 18, verse 36, when Pilate was questioning him, aren't you going to answer me? Don't you know I could release you? Jesus said in John 18:36, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place. That's kind of like the opposite of people say, well, this is not our kingdom. We can fight and rebel and protest against it because it's not our kingdom. Jesus said, because it's not your kingdom, you don't fight. The opposite of what the other views say. And it starts to get really, really heavy because even in a country where we have it made, and our government, it's got some corrupt issues about it, it's not as bad as everybody else's, it still becomes difficult for us. And the only way to deal with it is that the only way you ever be able to possibly imagine yourself obeying any of these commands and living this way is if you're filled with the Holy Spirit and walking with Him. And Jesus is Lord of your life. I don't know how you do it. You would certainly be a rebel if Jesus is not Lord. This is a profoundly frustrating thing when a top lawmaker in your country says, we got to pass it so we can see what's in it. And you go, what? Is it just me? Am I the only one frustrated? You shudder with disgust. Even if the law might have been a good one. Even if the law was a good law and someone wrote a law and they said, well, we need to pass it so we can find out what it is. Makes no sense. And yet, what? We're supposed to submit. See, verse 1, submit to the governing authorities, does not distinguish between good rulers or bad rulers. It does not distinguish between fair laws and unfair laws. And when Paul wrote this, Rome was in power. And the emperors were all corrupt. All of the emperors were corrupt. They thought themselves of God. They thought they were gods. You had to worship them. What kind of laws were those? That's way worse than we need to pass it so we can see what's in it. Their laws were worship me. Our responsibility is to submit to the governing authorities. And it says it elsewhere, Titus chapter 3, verse 1, remind the people to be subject to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready to do whatever is good. 1 Peter 2, 13 through 15, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Now the question comes out as soon as you come to terms with that. You say, okay, you got me. I'm going to submit to the governing authorities. I'm going to do good. I'm going to submit to them. It begs the question, does it? What if the government authorities do make laws that require us to disobey God's word? What if the governing authorities do make laws that prevent us from obeying God's word? Those two issues. And although I don't think that's really happening a whole lot in terms of real laws, I mean, it's happening. It's probably going to happen more in this country. What do you do then? Well, all I can do is point to you some issues in the Bible that kind of thing has happened. What about that? Well, the first one is in Exodus chapter 1. You know, Moses was a little baby, and the Israelites were growing, and they were just multiplying and multiplying, and the Egyptians were afraid of them. In chapter 1, verse 15 through 21, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, the midwives were the ladies who helped the women have their babies. He says, when you help the Hebrew women in childbirth, if it's a boy, kill him. But if it's a girl, let her live. See, girls can't grow up and do anything. They can do a lot of stuff. They can't fight wars. Your boys will grow up and be strong warriors, and we're afraid of them. So kill the boys. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. They didn't submit to the governing authorities. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered Pharaoh, Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive. By the time we got the telephone call that the lady's about to have babies, she's already broke water and she's going to deliver soon, and she's in childbirth. Well, by the time we get there, the baby's already there. Which is what? A lie. Not only did they disobey what the king told them, they lied about it. So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them their families of their own. Wow, these women disobeyed what the king said in order to do what God said, or to not do what God said not to do. Another classic text is in Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18. But the context is that Nebuchadnezzar made a statue, a tall statue that everybody had to worship. On this day, everybody fall down and worship that big statue. Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, replied to the king. They got in trouble. They didn't bow down. So the king was mad. He had them arrested and brought them in. Now, Daniel wasn't there, but these three fellows were there. O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. Well, you can burn us if you want to. We're not going to worship the image that you made. We rebel against your command. We do not submit to your governing authority over us. That's what they're saying. You're telling us to worship this image? We're not going to worship him. We worship the only true God. So one day if the government makes a command, a law that says you have to worship something else besides Jesus Christ, you don't do it. Back to Daniel again. Chapter 6, this is Daniel. It says he learned that the decree had been published. They'd made a decree that you had to worship nobody else, or you had to pray to nobody else except the king. As soon as he heard the decree, he learned that the decree had been published. He went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened toward Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. He ignored the directive. He ignored the order. He ignored the law. He ignored the command, because the command was contrary to him praying to the only true God. Acts chapter 4. This is Peter and John. They were preaching. A lot of people got saved, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, didn't like it. They called them in. They called them in again and commanded them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. We don't want to hear this Jesus fellow's name ever again. Y'all stop talking about him. No more talking about Jesus. But Peter and John replied, this is to their authorities, These are the people who are in charge of them. These are the governing authorities over them. They replied, "Judge for yourselves whether it is right in God's sight to obey you rather than God." You decide, are we going to obey you or God? For we cannot help speaking about what we have seen and heard. We're not going to be quiet because we can't be quiet. We saw Jesus raised from the dead. We're going to talk about that all the time. We don't care what you say. We're going to obey God. He told us to make disciples of all nations. In Acts chapter 5, just a few chapter later, verses 28 through 29, the Sanhedrin pulls them in again and says, "We gave you strict orders not to teach in this name." Remember? We commanded them not to speak and teach at all in the name of Jesus. We gave you strict orders not to teach in this name, he said. Yet you have filled Jerusalem with your teaching and are determined to make us guilty of this man's blood. Peter and the other apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than men." And we're probably going to look at this some more next time, these same texts again, because this issue will pop up again. But if the government gives you orders that are contradictory to what God says you have to do, or commands you to do, or what God commands you not to do, and the government's orders are contrary to that, I would say you need to obey God, not the government. That's the only time. The only time. It starts to get goofy because it's really important to us right now. Let me ask you, when are we going to be able to meet together again as a church? All of us, and fill all the chairs, and it'll be full. When? When the governor says we can. Is that right? Am I right? Now what if the governor says everybody can meet, and everybody can go shopping, and everybody can go to the restaurants, and everybody, but the churches, y'all can't gather in big groups yet? You just don't know. You have to make up our minds. What are we going to do? What does God say for us to do? Do not give up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing. That's what we got to deal with. So we'll deal with this, but I am ahead of myself. I got ahead of myself really, truly bad. And I would like to finish verse 1 today. So let's do verse 1. Therefore, in fact, you obey the government for this reason right here. You obey the government because of this. Verse 1, "For there is no authority except that which God has established." God has ordained the government to exist. God ordained the governor. God ordained the president. God ordained the government structures. There is no authority except that which God has established. Every flavor of it. No authority except, if not from God, they wouldn't exist. And here we go again. We've taught this on every occasion we get to teach it. It's here again. God is sovereign yet again. God is sovereign. That means God is in control of everything. God is in control of all the molecules in the universe. God is in control of every decision that comes out of anything. And here he's in control of the governments. First, he's in control just in principle and in general. He's sovereign this way. After the flood, back in Genesis chapter 9, God says, "And for your lifeblood," chapter 9, verses 5 through 6, "And for your lifeblood I will surely demand an accounting. I will demand an accounting from every animal, and from each man too. I will demand an accounting for the life of his fellow man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God, God has made man." Now, many commentators, just about all of them, have said this is the verse where God instituted government because he instituted capital punishment. If you kill someone, you have your life taken away too. The only people who have authority to take your life is the government authorities and the structures. So if you're guilty of murder, they're going to take your life. The responsibility of government is capital punishment. That was, God established that after the flood, that the government should exist to kick people around. But it's not just government in general, not just government as a whole, as a principle. It's all the governments, every specific one, all of the geopolitical nations that are out there, all the provinces, all the regions. There are no exceptions, not a single one. They're all within the scope, within the bounds, within the order of God's sovereign will and purpose. I would go as far as to say it's not just the mere principle of government, that government would exist and that government would exist in all the different places, but God's in control of who the actual rulers are in those governments. The actual person, the actual leader in power of those governments. God's in control of that too. Goes back to study this, I don't know how long ago it was, Romans 9. Wow, that was a long time ago. What does Paul say? Talking about salvation, hardening hearts. But he quotes Exodus, Romans 9:17. For the scripture says to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, Pharaoh of Egypt, I raised you up for this very purpose, that I might display my power in you. God raised Pharaoh up. God made Pharaoh the king of Egypt, just so he could display his power in him. Daniel chapter 2:21, God sets up kings and deposes them. He makes one man king and makes him not king. Daniel 4:17, this is Nebuchadnezzar went crazy. Daniel interpreted his dream, said, you're going to go crazy until you acknowledge this, so that the living may know that the Most High, this is Daniel chapter 4, verse 17, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of men. Well, that means God's in control of the government. And who is in the government? And who's in control of the government? Same thing, chapter 4, verse 25, Daniel. And in verse 32, it says the exact same thing. 7 times will pass for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men and gives them to anyone he wishes. And then when Nebuchadnezzar does go mad for 7 years and eats grass like a cow, lives out in the wilderness, lives out in the field, then Nebuchadnezzar comes back and says, after my sanity was returned to me, he says, in chapter 4, verse 34 through 35, then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the peoples of the earth are regarded as nothing. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. And no one can hold back his hand, sets over them anyone he wishes. Then you have Isaiah prophesying about, several 100 years before this, he prophesied. In Isaiah 45, verse 1, this is what the Lord says to his anointed, to Cyrus. Cyrus' great-grandmother wasn't even born yet. To Cyrus, whose right hand I take hold of to subdue nations before him and to strip kings of their armor. God's already prophesied that Cyrus is going to be a king and take over everybody else's kingdom. God's going to raise him up to do that. God calls him my anointed. God made Cyrus king of Persia. 1 Samuel chapter 2, verses 6 through 8. The Lord brings death and makes alive. He brings down to the grave and raises up. The Lord sends poverty and wealth. He humbles and he exalts. He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap. He seats them with princes and has them inherit a throne of honor. Who does this? Who's doing this? Who is the one in charge of the government? Who's the one in charge of who gets to be the king? Who gets to be the prince? Who is in charge? Who does it? God does it. Jeremiah 27, 4 through 6, this is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says. With my great power and outstretched arm, I made the earth and its people and the animals that are on it, and I give it to anyone I please. Now I will hand all your countries over to my servant Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. God's prophesying that Nebuchadnezzar is going to be in charge because he's the one that gives it away. Nobody rises to power unless God makes them rise to power. Nobody gets to be the king unless God makes them the king. And the best example is what Jesus said in John 19. This is the part where the governor, Pilate, is questioning Jesus. Verse 19, 10 through, chapter 19, 10 through 11. Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Don't you realize I'm the one in charge around here? I could let you go if I wanted to, or I could have you hung on a cross if I wanted to. Why don't you answer me, Jesus? I'm asking you some simple questions here. Come on. Jesus answered, verse 11, you would have no power over me if it were not given you from above. If it were not given to you from above, you would have no power. The only reason, Pilate, that you're even standing here as the governor of this area in the Roman province of Judea, the only reason you're here is because God made you here. And Paul basically repeats himself in verse 1, Romans 13. The authorities that exist have been established by God. No authority would exist if God didn't make it exist, and all the authorities that do exist, He established. Establish means to place, to arrange in place, to ordain, to designate, to appoint. God did it. He sets the governors in place. He sets the governors where they are. He's the one who ordains and appoints the rulers where they are. God does that. God does that in an election year of 2020, United States of America. Do you realize that the next president will not be decided by your vote? It'll be decided by God. Now, you go out and vote, because those are the means He uses in this country to make it happen. But God establishes that way. He establishes them where they are, just how they are. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to blow your mind for a second, and then we'll finish. Let me ask you about this. This is a quote. It says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitled them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. Those are the first words of the Declaration of Independence of the United States. You know what those guys were saying? You know what they were saying? They were saying to King George of England, we rebel. We're going to make our own country and not listen to you anymore. Does that not blow your mind? Those guys were disobeying Romans 13:1. The United States was birthed by men who violated this verse all because of freedom. So I want to say it this way, and then we'll close. All the free elections of all the free republics, all the free elections of all the free democracies, all the free of every kind and every order. Pick one. Pick whichever flavor you like. A republic, a democratic republic, a Republican democracy. Pick however you want it to say, whatever you want it to be like. All the revolutions, the violent ones and the non-violent ones. All the coups d'etats, that means when someone takes over, like a military coup, they come in, all their soldiers take over the capital, and they become, the general becomes the leader. All the monarchs, all the kings, all the tyrannical dictators, and how they rose to power, some of those by coup d'etat. All the socialist philosophical governments, all the communist governments, etc. And I know I left something out. Pick one. Pick any government you want. Pick any government you want and any government leader you want. None of those determine who's in power. God does. So every one of us are commanded to submit to the government, submit to their authority, not because they're smart or wise or the best one you could ever have in the world, but because God said He set them up. God made the president the president. God made the last president the president. And God will make the next president the president. We have more to learn, a whole lot more. Mind-blowing stuff. Let's pray. Father God, we do ask that you will give us grace and wisdom to understand these truths from your text, the text of your word, Romans 13:1. Submit to the government. We thank you and praise you that you gave it to us. We need your help so that we may understand it and obey it. Let us be, as Christian people, as followers of the Lord Jesus, the best citizens anywhere. Whether we're Americans living in a free democracy, in a republic, or whether we're Christians living in communist China, or North Korea, or closed countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Let us be the best citizens they have, because we submit to the government. Do that for us, I pray, so that Jesus' name will be honored and glorified in us. Amen.